Go ahead.
Pretty good?
Yeah.
All right. So, Deputy Nacnac, Sheriff's Office. Thanks, guys, for coming. I know we sent invites out to a lot of people, and appreciate you guys coming out. This thing's pretty important to me and to us, and so it's good to be able to talk face to face and answer questions direct and kind of clear the air around a lot of the stuff that we're doing with our firearms program, not just the new equipment stuff, but also our training. So, like I said, I'm Deputy Nacnac. We've got Sheriff Garcia here. We have our Chief Civil Deputy, Chief Belici. Sergeant Kyle Pettit, he works the firearms program with me. And in the back there, we got Commander Parker and Under Sheriff Ray from the SO. So, just so you know who you're talking to, a little bit about me. I joined the Army when I was 18. Applied for and went to a selection for Ranger Battalion. Did a few years there, did a couple combat deployments, and then got out, tried to go to college for a bit. Didn't work out for me, but I did take a pretty good Microsoft Office class, so I was able to put together this PowerPoint. Anyway, I ended up active duty again, this time training the National Guard. So I went through all sorts of, from battalion-sized 1,200-person elements. I managed their training down to small reconnaissance teams. After that, I found myself out here, and I was hired in November of 2020, and graduated the academy in like June or July of 2021. Pretty shortly thereafter, there wasn't much of a firearms program in place, so I kind of started building that up, and officially took over the firearms program summer of last year. So, unless you guys have any questions, I'm a pretty casual guy, so if you guys have questions, just shout them out, and we'll go through it. We'll go down those rabbit holes as we encounter them. You don't gotta hold your questions or anything like that. I don't really know how these press things normally go, so I don't know if that's standard etiquette or not, but
run your shit and ask questions afterwards.
all right, you can just ask if it strikes you though. It's good with me. So you go ahead and hit the slide.
I'll get the spacebar gnome back here.
So we're just going to jump right into some of the stuff we're doing in the training unit and within the firearms program in general. So there's a lot of conversation. I'm going to turn this thing so you guys aren't trying to. There's a lot of conversation, and even within the different agencies within the county about what we were doing with our qualifications. We did change the rifle qual. I'll get to that in a second. But the only qualification that can result in any sort of change in your status, i.e. termination or reassignment, pending how you do want it, is the pistol qual. It's your primary duty gun qualification. If you're not qualified with a pistol, you cannot be a peace officer out here. So this one, the one that, if you will, really matters when it comes to your employment status, has not changed. It's the same qualification that they ran when I got here in 2020, and you've been here longer than I. Yeah, so there's been no change. The plan is that we're gonna have a new qualification. My plan is we're gonna have a new qualification in place by January of next year. But that hasn't happened. That's not an official thing. That's just something I'm gonna start working through this year, coming up with a new qualification. So the first item is there's no news when it comes to a pistol qual. I know a lot of people talked about it. I don't have social media, but people ask me, I saw this on, someone posted this, or I saw that, and it's a small county, you know how people talk, and so at the end of the day, nothing changed when it came to the pistol qualification. Straight out of the horse's mouth, they haven't changed anything. All right. So what did change was the rifle qualification. So up top left is what we used to do. That is straight from CJTC. So if you guys aren't familiar, I don't know what levels of familiarity you guys have with the law enforcement community in Washington State. The Criminal Justice Training Commission is kind of the centralized, like in California, it'd be California Post. It's kind of the centralized certification body for the state. So they put out qualifications that like really small agencies will use if they don't have their own firearms instructors. That's typically how that goes, is they don't have their own firearms instructors to develop their qualifications, so they reach out to CJTC and they just use what CJTC provides them. So that top left one is what we were using. That's straight from CJTC. Of note, it was a 50 round qualification, 5-0. It was shot to a 70% standard. Misses don't necessarily result in the failure of the qualification, and it didn't require any rifle manipulations. So what I mean by misses don't necessarily result in a failure. So if you're shooting to a 70% standard and it's 50 rounds, that meant under this previous qualification you could miss a non-moving. This target's not moving and it's not shooting back at you. It's pretty as low stress as we can get. You could miss that thing 15 out of 50 times. I mean, you could shoot anything but the target 15 out of 50 times and still pass this qualification. That's not something. We don't want a guy who can only hit a target 70% of the time, run around our community with a rifle. Right. So that's one of the big catalysts for change when it came to me wanting to put a new qualification in. The other thing, no rifle manipulations were required. That's important because I'm just going to speak plainly. When I got here, there were officers and deputies who did not know how to conduct basic rifle manipulations. Because previously it was kind of, we trained them to get to this standard, and that's where they stay. So if there's no rifle manipulations as part of the qualification, they never learned how to do these rifle manipulations. When I talk about manipulations, I mean things like if you were to one of the general courtesies when you're handling a firearm is when you pick the firearm up, you clear it, right? So you make sure there's no ammunition in it. So you would lock the bolt to the rear, you would open the action, and you would check and make sure there's no ammunition in it. There are deputies that didn't know how to do that, and officers in this county. It was pretty eye-opening for me that was the case. Pretty recently, an agency that doesn't regularly train with us, one of their officers came up to me and told me that prior to training with me, that they just learned what these buttons on the side of the gun do. So what I'm getting at is it was an unacceptably low bar, especially in a rural county such as ours, where a SWAT team may be hour, 20, 2 hours, 3 hours away. So a rifle deployment is significantly higher for our guys than, say, if you worked in city of Seattle or something like that. And the stakes of it are much higher because you don't have a whole team of guys behind you to pick up your slack. So that bar was unacceptably low. So with all those things in mind, I pretty much immediately upon taking over the firearms program started looking at how I wanted to change the qualification. And I don't think that qualifications, a lot of guys when they're new to the training world, they want this qualification to be this crazy high bar, right? Because they say, well, the harder the qualification is, the better my guys are going to be. What ends up happening is people aren't able to meet that bar. You either have to terminate them or you have to devote your training to people who are closer to getting that bar, meeting that bar. I think the qualification, my philosophy and the philosophy that we have and many other law enforcement agencies have, is that the qualification is the absolute baseline. We expect you to be able to pass the qualification with no we don't need to train you up to get to this point. That is what we expect from you on your worst day, is to pass this qualification. So with that in mind, the PCSR rifle qualification is shot to an 80% standard on a smaller target. So I should have grabbed them. Apologize, I didn't grab these targets. The CJTC target, it's called the Belia target. It's the Basic Law Enforcement Academy target. It's larger than I am, which again, you can miss that thing 15 times with the old ball. It's larger than I am. What we're using now is what's called an IPSC target, or a USPSA target. That's a cardboard, roughly anatomically correct silhouette. So you have to get an 80% standard, which basically equates to, it must be a torso shot if the shot is prescribed to the torso. You must hit somewhere within the torso. It consists of 30 rounds rifle, 3 rounds pistol, so it's actually less rounds, but it's far more comprehensive. And then any miss of the target is an automatic failure of the line. Again, remember this is a static target. It's not moving on you. It's not shooting at you. And these are really generous times. So again, any miss is an auto fail. You miss the target, that's your qual's a wash. We're going to retrain, and we're going to reattempt at a later date. It also incorporates every manipulation a shooter could reasonably be expected to perform if they deploy a patrol rifle. So it requires you to change general rule of thumb, there's two different ways to change a magazine. You can either keep a partially expended magazine and put a fresh one in, or you can, if you have a totally empty mag, you can just dump that mag and put a new one in. So it goes over both those types of reloading a rifle, both those methods of reloading a rifle. It goes over clearing malfunction, so if the gun fails to fire due to a myriad of reasons, we cover every possible way that can happen, every reasonable way that can happen, and the shooter's forced to clear that under time to display their proficiency. So we rolled that out in January of this year, and I think it's worth noting people looked at it, a lot of people that it went out to, and I got a lot of feedback like, holy crap, that's, we can't do that, that's a crazy high bar. We implemented it within the county. We just finished our qualifications last month, and no one has fully failed this thing. Everyone, there were a couple people that required, they shot it and didn't pass, and we retrained them, and we did our remedial training, and everyone within the county that is assigned a rifle, within the sheriff's office that is assigned a rifle, has passed this qualification. So it's not some crazy high bar. And this is just our qualification policy on failure of qualification. So I separated into primary duty gun qualification and qualification of all other firearms. So your primary duty gun is the pistol that you're assigned to carry on duty. So if you guys want, I can print these out at the end of this. That way you guys just have the. There's not a problem with that, right? Yeah. I'll just print it out for you guys if you want. Just let me know. So anyway, the primary duty gun qualification. If you fail this, the primary duty gun qualification, we notify your supervisor. You're scheduled for remedial training. You get a second attempt. If you fail again on that second attempt after your remedial training, you're placed on paid administrative leave, and basically your place of duty at that point is the range, or it's training, and then you're afforded a third attempt to qualify. Upon that third attempt, if you were to fail again, you could be reassigned or up to termination. All other firearms, like the rifle, you get 2 attempts on day 1. Basically, you attempt to shoot it. We immediately retrain if it's like a quick fix. We immediately retrain, fix the deficiency, and you get a second attempt. If you still fail on that second attempt on that day, you can't use you have to cease carrying that on duty. You can't deploy it on duty. You have to display the proficiency. You can't use it. So,
do you test with both hands or just one, just primary?
For the rifle or the pistol?
Both.
So for the pistol, they do shoot non-dominant hand.
Uh-huh.
Are you asking like shooting with both hands?
Yeah, or like for a rifle, sometimes you're a better, like if you're going around this corner instead of this corner.
Right, you're short stocking it.
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Okay.
So again, this is that baseline qualification standard that I want to see. We start talking even within the world I come from, which is generally regarded as a pretty high level of proficiency with rifles. You start talking about shoulder swapping and stuff like that. That's no longer a basic marksmanship task, but now we're starting to work tactics.
Okay.
And I try to avoid working tactics at the range because that's how you end up with what I call range theatrics, where there's imaginary opponents all around you and you're doing stuff that just doesn't make sense. So I deliberately did not include that. Now we do train that throughout the year, but that's not part of the qualification. So yeah, and that covers it. So it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's not our philosophy is not that it's not the tool, it's the operator, right? So all the talk about, they're getting new rifles and all that's not really, I don't really care what a deputy is carrying as long as it's serviceable and appropriate for the task. What really matters to me as a trainer, as an instructor, is that they're using strong moral judgment, restraint, and they have a high level of proficiency with whatever tool they've chosen. That is our obligation as a training, as an instructor. That's my obligation, not just to the community, but to the deputies, right? If they're ever in a situation that they're unprepared for within the realm of firearms, that's on me. And so that's the deputies, and then the community too. No one calls 911 and expects the cops to show up and go, "Oh crap, I don't really know how to deal with this," right? People call the police because they expect us to solve a problem for them, right? And so that is our obligation to the community as well. We can't fulfill that obligation if we're not giving deputies serviceable tools to accomplish the job. Right? We don't have them driving around in surplus Willys Jeeps that we got for free from the federal government from Vietnam. Spoiler alert, there's a reason I used that example. And then the last thing, it's not our duty to train how it's always been. This is just a cancerous thought in law enforcement. I'm pretty new to law enforcement, so I still kind of look at it from the outside in. But I think, all of us are on the same page within the sheriff's office, at least, that is a cancerous thought in law enforcement. It's just because that's what we did before, it's safe. We didn't get sued when we did it this way, so we're going to keep doing it this way forever, or whatever the logic or rationale is behind it. If we just trained our deputies for how it's always been, we wouldn't actually need to train firearms, right? We just give them the guns and they go about their job, because we haven't had many OISs, haven't had many officer-involved shootings out here. We've never had a school shooting out here. We wouldn't need to train our deputies for a critical incident like that, right? It's never happened before. That's a cancerous thought in law enforcement, and that we are actively stomping out within our sphere of influence here. So, next slide now. So patrol rifles, I don't know, you guys, so sometimes people are like, well, why do you even have an AR-15? Why do you even have a patrol rifle? They're standard issue. They've been in common use for decades. I pulled two examples from history that kind of were catalysts for change, right? It was why law enforcement started to adopt the patrol rifle and issue out patrol rifles. So the first one was in 1966. It was the University of Texas shooting. A former Marine climbed a 70-meter or like 231 foot tower. He had about a 5 square city block fields of fire, observation fields of fire from up there. He staged a bunch of firearms around the top of that mezzanine and proceeded to shoot indiscriminately at people for about 90 minutes. Law enforcement did not take 90 minutes to get there, but he continued to fire for 90 minutes. Law enforcement, when they arrived, were armed with pistols and shotguns that were largely ineffective at that distance. The law enforcement resorted to, this is Texas in the 60s, right? So all these college boys, all these good old boys got rifles and racks in the backs of their trucks and whatnot. And so the police resorted to pulling rifles out of students' trucks in order to return effective fire, like hunting rifles and whatnot, in order to return effective fire on this guy. Ultimately, they deputized a bookstore keeper who ran up with a rifle of his own, and kind of an ad hoc group of guys went up there and finished the problem. So that happened. A bunch of other incidents happened, but really the big one in modern times or as contemporary times that people reference when they talk about law enforcement adopting patrol rifles is the North Hollywood shootout. So there's really dramatic YouTube footage, or not YouTube, helicopter footage on YouTube and whatnot of these two guys who robbed a series of banks. They were wearing a mix of homemade and surplus bought 3A body armor, which is a threat level rating, so it's rated to stop up to 44 Magnum or 12 gauge buck. Same stuff that we wear now. They robbed this bank, cops showed up, and they got in like a 45-minute gunfight. Police fired about 700 rounds, somewhere in there. Suspects returned fire with about 1,000 or 1,100 rounds. So about 1,700 rounds flying through the air of an urban built-up area. The reason why they shot so much and why this thing was so protracted was, again, the ineffectiveness of the tools that the law enforcement had at their disposal at that time. They shot one dude like 30 times because the majority of those rounds were stopped by his body armor because they didn't have anything that could defeat his body armor organic to their squad cars. They ended up going to a gun store and asking a gun store owner for some AR-15s and ammunition. He provided that, and then they shortly thereafter solved that problem as well. So, moral of the story is law enforcement had to turn to passersby who were better equipped to deal with the threat than they had organic to their own squad cars or their own elements. So after that, it kind of played out across the nation, right? Everyone started issuing out AR-15s or Mini 14s because they're a little less scary looking at the time during the assault weapons ban. They started issuing out variations of these rifles to law enforcement across the country. That played out here in Pacific County and I don't know what we had prior to 2013, but the furthest back that I have access to in our records that I can find is 2013. We acquired a bunch of surplus M16A1s from the federal government through a program called, well, at the time it was called Thermo, now it's called FESA. So we acquired these surplus M16A1s.